group 2, right? Because there are more tables than there were topics. So was it this table too? Good one. Was it that table? Table 10? Which one did you have? Never mind. Okay. What's your definition of terrorism? Do you have a definition of terrorism? Good to know. What is your definition of terrorism? Off your phones, please.
Oh, yeah, here it is.
Stop being rude. What is it?
Unauthorized use of violence against innocent people.
The unauthorized use of violence? Or the authorized use?
Unauthorized.
Unauthorized use of violence, okay. Against people.
And then this was in, and then it ends.
The unauthorized use of violence against people.
In. And that's it.
Okay, I'm going to exclude the word in.
All right. That's what
Terrorism is the unauthorized use of violence against people. So a drunk husband goes home and beats up his wife. The cops arrest him for terrorism. What do you think of your definition?
we weren't done with it.
I like that definition.
I think we'll all agree that that definition lacks. There's no difference then between anything that's violent and terrorism. Every act of violence is terrorism, according to your group. Anyway, move on. Okay, country X in a war, accidentally kills civilians. It's not intentional. And of country Y. Terrorism or not? Is this terrorism?
Yes. Terrorism.
Is this group aware of what we're doing? Look at the scenario and tell me if you think that scenario 2 is terrorism.
Yes.
Why?
Because it's an unauthorized use of violence.
Really? Does the thing that says in a war mean anything?
Oh, yeah. Okay, yeah.
So is it terrorism?
No.
Why not?
It's war.
Okay. And does the fact that it, by the way, this is for everyone. Does the fact that it happened during a war, I mean, it's an acknowledged conflict, a war, does that mean not terrorism?
Yeah.
How many of you raise your hand nice and high? Raise your hand nice and high. Will you keep your hands up for a moment?
We're just gonna go.
Keep your hands up.
Keep it up.
You're saying that if it's during a war, it's not terrorism.
Keep your hand up.
Where's he gonna
I
go?
don't make a decision.
Sure.
Just taking my picture that I'm now going to send to the FBI believers in Al Qaeda. There we go. Defenders of 9/11. Send. You might be getting a phone call later. So, and I got the proof. You raised your hand. I got the picture. So I'll just pick on Colton there because you were the one nodding vigorously. If I were able to prove to you later in this class that Al Qaeda, a group, declared war on the U.S. before 9/11, declared war, and that the U.S. knew it, that would mean 9/11 was not terrorism, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You would agree.
They didn't even do it though. Bush did it.
Yeah, Bush did it.
Okay, let's come back to reality world. How many of you would agree that if I can prove that Al Qaeda declared war before 9/11, that would mean that 9/11 was an act of war, but not an act of terrorism?
By definition of 2, that wasn't accidental.
Yeah, yes, I know, but we're focusing on this part right here. You'll notice that I sort of avoided the word accidental. Okay.
Yeah.
How many of you would agree? If I can prove to you that Al Qaeda declared war before 9/11, that would make 9/11 an act of war. No different than when the United States dropped the bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, an act of war. Come on, raise your hand. Raise your hand if you agree. Why are some of you who a minute ago raised your hands are not raising your hands now? Why? See, what I think's going on is this is what's going on in some of your brains. It's not terrorism because it's America, but that is terrorism because Muslim or Arab, or it must be terrorism. A terrorist group did it. Anything a terrorist group does is by definition terrorism. A terrorist walks. Terrorism. A terrorism walks his dog. That's an act of terrorism because that's a terrorist. A terrorist breathes. Terrorism. Anything a terrorist does is by definition terrorism.
Terrorism has lost all meaning to me.
Oh, we're only 2 of the things in. Awesome. Okay. I intend on proving to you that Al Qaeda did declare war on the U.S. This will happen next week. And that the U.S. acknowledged it, knew it, and that 9/11 was not this act out of the blue that the U.S. did not know about, that 9/11 was the last in a series of attacks. First, Al Qaeda attacked this little thing and said, hey, U.S., we want you to engage in a certain behavior. And if you don't, we're going to blow this up. And the U.S. said, screw you. So they did. And then Al Qaeda said, all right, we're going to attack this next. And did, and did, and did, and did, and then did 9/11. Which would mean 9/11 was an act of war, no different than the U.S. bombing Hiroshima and Nagasaki, right?
Bush did 9/11.
Why are you shaking your head? No. I don't understand the difference based on the definition that we just established here. What's the difference? To be continued. All right, we'll allow it to be continued. You had your hand up.
You might have partially answered. I was just going to say that if the Al Qaeda declared war on the U.S., I was wondering if you actively acknowledged and were hey, we're at war with you too, because if I hadn't said,
I'll say this: that there was an acknowledgement. Yep, got the message. Okay, so allow me to plant the seeds of no, that's not right. That 9/11 was an act of terrorism and that Hiroshima and Nagasaki were acts of war and they're different. Okay? According to what you're just telling me, right? I am going to declare war on Will.
No.
I now grab my scissors and stab him in the eyeballs. And then the cops come and arrest me, and I say to the cops, oh, don't worry. I declared war on Will. And the cops are like, oh, have a good day. Sorry, Will. He declared war on you. And then they left. According to you people that are half thinking about this, that would be an act of war. Not a crime. It would be an act of war because I said the words, we declare war on you. Next time you do anything illegal, just say the words, I declare war, and then cheat. When the teacher catches you, you say, oh, don't worry. This is an act of war. And the teacher will be like, oh, and then go back to teaching. There's a spare chair right there. Any other thoughts on number 2? Oh, wait till we get down here. Okay. Group 3. Yes? All right. What's your definition of terrorism? Does that group have a definition of terrorism? Oh, that's good. What is your definition? By the way, today's lesson will not be on the website. Not a chance. I'm not getting phone calls from your angry parents that I accuse you of being terrorist lovers.
Oh.
I'm not putting up for those phone calls. None of this happened. Prove it. Go ahead. Okay, I heard unlawful use of violence. Then you lost me. To provoke citizens. Terror in citizens. The unlawful use of violence to provoke terror in citizens. Okay, so can I just add one little thing here? Think about. By the way, the rest of you, do you have a definition? Is there anything about a bigger cause as part of your definition? Right? A random act of violence, I just blow up the school because I'm bored one day. That's an act of violence that fear causes fear, but is that terrorism? Maybe there should be like a bigger cause, right? There's a message being sent. Otherwise, it's just kind of a random act, maybe. Okay? All right. Having said that, let's look at their scenario. This one's a little, were you confused at all? Okay. Country X hires a group in country Y to assassinate the leaders of country Y because country Y's leaders oppose the policies of country X.
Or to get people to listen to
Let me
you.
rephrase that. The United States hires a group in Cuba to assassinate Cuban leaders because Cuba opposes American policies. Terrorism or not?
What?
That group? Yes, terrorism.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
very good.
Why?
Because it probably makes people scared. Like, I think people are a little scared when they get shot. Anyone can get shot, right?
Does it matter to you? Does it matter to you that it's a country? Can countries engage in terrorism? According to you, according to that group, can a country be a terrorist state? Go ahead, thought.
Terrorism isn't it usually the
Unauthorized.
unauthorized use of violence without authorized.
So, of course, the question I'd have for you is, who has the authority to authorize? Couldn't Al Qaeda say, "Don't worry, this was authorized"? A government. So, are you arguing? And this, by the way, is real. This is an argument that countries cannot engage in terrorism. Because anything a country does is, by its internal definition, a warranted, authorized act on the part of that country. That doesn't mean it's justified. What it means is it's not terrorism. It's something else, but not terrorism.
Wouldn't it be like an act of war?
Act of war. Aha! Oh, very good. It took this long to finally introduce those three magical words. I thought it would come up before. When a country engage, by the way, I'm not saying this is the answer, but this is a possible answer. Countries engage in acts of war. Group, whether authorized or not, it's an act of war. Groups cannot engage in acts of war. Let's go back to my hypothetical. I argued, and I want you to rethink what I said before. I said that if I can prove to you that Al Qaeda declared war, that would make 9/11 an act of war. Would any of you like to change your vote now? Because we've just been introduced by him to a new concept, and that is the concept called act of war. That countries cannot engage in terrorism because they're countries. But it also means something else. By the way, again, you can disagree with what I'm saying. Groups can't declare war. I can't declare war on will. I am not a country. I am a person. And by the way, quite a person. But I cannot declare war. Groups cannot declare war. Only countries can declare war. Only nations can declare war. That would mean that when the United States bombed Pearl Harbor, the United States did not bomb Pearl Harbor. It was the Germans. We all know that.
Let's go back to reality, Mr. Potter.
It wasn't the Germans who bombed Pearl Harbor? He's on
He's
on roll. That when the United States bombed Hiroshima and Nagasaki, that was not an act of terrorism because it was during a war, but it was a country that did it. You, in your minds, you can create. By the way, has anyone seen the point of this whole exercise yet? That's good. In your minds, you can create a definition of terrorism that goes like this. It's when a non-state engages in an act of violence in the name of a bigger cause. There's terrorism. Countries can't be terrorists. They can engage in acts of war, which is what Hiroshima and Nagasaki were. Declared war, and then we attacked. But that would be an act of war, not an act of terrorism. Any other thoughts on that? Or go ahead.
So does that mean that when a terrorist group such as Al-Qaeda gets control of a country, they're
Theoretically, Al-Qaeda-istan. And that happened. It just ended about a month ago. It wasn't Al-Qaeda-istan. It was, in essence, ISIS-istan. Is the Islamic State controlled about a third of Iraq and about a third of Syria. And they declared themselves a state. And as a result, in their minds, they were engaging in acts of war, no longer acts of terrorism. The problem, well, does anyone see the problem? There it is, right there. The lack of recognition. You can't just declare yourself a country. Again, my scissors, I stab Will. The cops come. Oh, don't worry. I declared independence from the United States. This was an act of war.
Wow, so
No, they'd say as they hauled me away.
So you're a traitor now.
Okay. Any other thoughts on this one? So let me revisit. Group 3, 4, 3. You're 4. You're group
Four.
4,
No, 3.
3. Terrorism or not? Are you changing your mind? United States attempts to assassinate Fidel Castro because Castro is hostile to the United States. Is it terrorism? It's still terrorism. They hired the group. Aha. So the group that hired is not the terrorist, but the group is. So the United States wasn't the terrorist, but the pilot who dropped the bomb on Hiroshima was.
Wait, what?
Well, no, he was American. No, but he was in the employment of the U.S. government. So that's different.
So was the group.
No, they're contracted.
What's the difference? Okay. Any other thoughts? Let's try a few more. These are fun. Okay, group 4. Are you kidding? I have a group of American Al-Qaeda loving, America hating people in here, and I have video proof. Definition of terrorism. Go ahead.
A person or group using force or local violence to harm, intimidate, or control people, or to destroy monuments or property to achieve political goals or maybe.
Okay, so I've heard that there's a bigger goal in mind, that terrorism can happen even if no one's harmed, right? You destroy the Statue of Liberty, that's terrorism, okay? And countries cannot engage in terrorist acts. Did I hear that right? Because you said individual or group. So no country. Countries can engage in war crimes, but it's not terrorism. All right, so let's take a look at this one. Again, this is another one of these country X, country Y things. Follow along. This time I don't want to reveal the reality of what this is based on until after we have a little bit of a discussion, okay? So country X has a separatist group that blows up a railroad station in country Y. So there's people from this country inside this country, and they blow up a railroad station, okay? To discourage the government of country Y from supporting the policies of the government of country X. So this country is a puppet of this country. This country controls this country. But some people in that country sneak into this country and blow up a railroad station, killing civilians. So it's not the government, it's a group. Terrorism? You would say terrorism. Okay, so how many of you would agree that that would be terrorism? Nice and high. And will you raise your hand? Nice and high. Don't be afraid to raise your hand just because I'm getting my camera out.
Mine's getting twisted.
Got it. Okay. She's flashing that. That should be your mugshot. Okay. Nazi lovers.
Oh, great honor.
Got it.
Thanks for letting me read.
Heck yeah, bro.
So you guys love the Nazis because, of course, this was when Polish people snuck into Nazi Germany and blew up railroad stations in Nazi Germany because the Nazis controlled Poland. You Nazi lover. Oh, apparently you have a response. Go ahead.
It's still terrorism. We just, like, with no context, it's still terrorism.
Oh, you're almost there. You're almost to a truth I want you to discover. You're almost there. It is terrorism But
It's not bad.
oh! So we have now been introduced to another concept, and that is justifiable terrorism. Terrorism for the good guys. Wow.
Yeah.
During World War II, the Polish government could not have authorized the blowing up of railroad stations in Germany because the Polish government was a puppet of Nazi Germany. But there were individuals and groups in Poland acting on their own who snuck into Germany and engaged in clearly acts of terrorism. But I don't think too many of us would cry over it because they were attacking Nazis. Okay? How many of you agree? How many of you agree with what I just said? Come on, nice and high. I got you. Al-Qaeda lovers. What's the difference? You explain to me the difference between that and 9/11. When a group in a country that was a puppet of the SSR sneaks into the United States and blows up a building. 1 minute ago, you were like, hooray, good terrorism. So is 9/11 good terrorism?
No.
Why not?
It was against
It's America.
And now the ultimate truth, the whole point of this exercise. How many of you get it? How many of you understand what I've been trying to do? Kennedy, don't you get it? How many of you are lost? You do not understand what's going on right now. I keep calling you Nazi lovers and the terrorist lovers.
Let me say something.
Go ahead.
History is written by the victors. So when a nation on our side is attacked, it's seen as evil. But when we attack them, it's seen as bad. There's nothing saying 300 years from now, history books could write about the evil American Empire that conquered the world and controlled it in a sphere of influence for 100 years. Depends on who wins.
Very
Who
good.
writes
So
history.
I'm going to add to what Will just said by just the nugget of truth in this little exercise. And we will continue. We're running out of time here, but we will continue. Is this: terrorism is in the eye of the beholder. My definition of terrorism is valid because I'm the one who has it. We as Americans have the right. This is America. Why are you on your phone?
This is important. Calculator.
My bad. Why are you on your phone?
He's trying to calculate how hot.
We as Americans have the right to call Al-Qaeda terrorists because we can say, as Ethan said here, we can't because we believe in what we're doing. But if we're allowing ourselves that, then we have to acknowledge that in the minds of the people that we label terrorists, we're the terrorists. That they're the good guys. Doesn't that make sense? When you engage in an act, you believe in what you're doing. You think it's right. If you were able to interview the 19 people who got on those 3 planes and say, why are you a terrorist? Their response, I'm guessing here, but it would go something like this. We're not the terrorists. You are. You're the terrorists. We're the ones acting in heroic acts like the Polish were attacking the Nazis. We're attacking you. But I will also continue to argue that I will prove to you that Al-Qaeda declared war. By the way, I am not saying that means that 9/11 was justified. An act of war is an act of war. That still could mean it's bad. But terrorism is a hard thing to define. In many ways, it's sort of like pornography, right? If you try and define pornography, ultimately, by the way, when the Supreme Court legalized pornography, it did. It said, look, it's a form of expression. But what the Supreme Court said was, we can't define it, but we know it when we see it. I can look at something and say, yep, that's pornography. And when you said, well, why? What is it about it that makes this pornography? I mean, why is the statue of David pornographic? Michelangelo built this amazing statue. It's the David statue. It's in Florence. Why isn't that pornography? It's just because because it was Michelangelo, right? And it was old, and it can't be pornography. Pornography, we all know different, right? How can you define something? Because as soon as you do, I can show you something and say this meets all your definition, and according to your definition, it's not pornography. And you look at it and say, but it is. That's pornographic. No, it isn't. Look at your definition. Right? That's the point here. I'm showing you these things and saying, okay, according to your definition of terrorism, this is either or is either not terrorism. And many of you are saying, yeah, it is. Yeah, it is. But not according to your definition. But it's just sort of yeah, it is because I know it when I see it. I know it. Just there's something inert about it that makes it so or makes it not so. Okay. Any other final thoughts before we shut down for today? That was fun. We will finish. But we're done for today. Today's only a 2 mod. All right. Thank you all. Have a lovely rest of your day. You will not see today's video anywhere.
I won't. How am I going to catch up on what I missed?
It's destroyed.